On June 6, 1944, the world's attention focused on the bloody beaches of Normandy, where Allied forces fought to establish a foothold in Nazi-occupied Europe. But while soldiers stormed Omaha and Utah beaches under devastating German fire, another battle raged across France, one fought in shadows, railway yards, and telephone exchanges. The French resistance, coordinating with British and American intelligence agencies, unleashed more than 1,000 acts of sabotage in a single day, crippling German communications and delaying crucial reinforcements that could have thrown the invaders back into the sea. This was not random violence. It was a meticulously planned military operation involving 7 color-coded plans: Plan Vert, Plan Violet, Plan Tortue, Plan Rouge, Plan Noir, Plan Jaune, and Plan Bleu, each targeting a different element of German military infrastructure. The coordination was unprecedented, as between March 1st and June 6, 1944, French resistance fighters carried out 1,800 acts of railway sabotage, complementing 2,400 targets destroyed by Allied air forces. On the night of June 5th to 6th alone, partisans blew up railway lines at 486 separate locations across northern France. The cost was brutal. By evening on June 6th, the resistance had suffered 124 casualties, killed, wounded, missing, or captured. Every act of sabotage was conducted under the threat of torture and execution. Yet these men and women persisted, knowing that each destroyed rail line, each severed telephone cable, could mean the difference between Allied victory and catastrophic defeat. The railway system was Nazi Germany's circulatory system in occupied France, moving troops, ammunition, and supplies to threatened sectors. Plan Vert aimed to sever this lifeline at the moment of maximum vulnerability. The statistics tell an extraordinary story. Between June 1943 and May 1944, resistance fighters damaged 1,822 trains, including 1,500 locomotives. By June 1944, the operational readiness of locomotives had plummeted from 80% at the beginning of the year to critically low levels. The sabotage techniques varied from sophisticated to brutally simple. Trained engineers from France's National Railway Company knew exactly where to place explosives for maximum disruption. Some practiced slow sabotage, deliberate delays in repairs, falsified maintenance records, and strategic incompetence that infuriated German occupiers, but was nearly impossible to prove. One partisan recalled with dark humor that they blew up a rail in one spot, and the Germans spent 3 days trying to figure out how it got there. Eventually they realized there was no sabotage, the rail just broke from age, and the resistance got credit for nothing. The night of June 5th to 6th saw the crescendo of these efforts. Resistance cells across France, alerted by coded messages broadcast over BBC Radio London, struck simultaneously at 486 locations. The goal was not just to damage individual lines, but to create systemic paralysis. A German military report from June 7th complained that sabotage had destroyed their ability to rapidly transport troops and ammunition. Railway workers themselves became crucial resistance members. Pierre Delestrin organized underground cells within the railway company, though he was captured and executed at Dachau concentration camp in 1945. His networks survived him, ensuring that even trains that managed to depart faced mysterious delays, missed connections, and accidental misdirection of critical supplies. An interesting historical debate concerns the true effectiveness of rail destruction. Soviet historian Ivan Starinov calculated that Germans possessed 11 million rails at the start of 1943, suggesting that destroying even 214,000 rails would have limited impact on overall capacity. However, the paradox lay in concentration. When partisans systematically destroyed a specific section for 6 months, Germans could not run a single train through it. The June 1944 attacks succeeded because they were coordinated and concentrated, not scattered. While Plan Vert attacked physical movement, Plan Violet targeted something equally vital: communication. The objective was to paralyze German command communications for 3 days, from June 5th to June 7th, the critical window when confusion could prove fatal to defenders. Telephone and telegraph lines crisscrossed occupied France, linking German headquarters, coastal fortifications, and reserve divisions. Resistance fighters, many recruited from France's long-distance underground line service, possessed intimate knowledge of every cable, pole, and switching station. They did not just cut cables. They cut them in multiple places along single lines, blew up poles at curves to make repairs difficult, and sabotaged switching equipment to maximize the time needed for restoration. The results exceeded expectations. From June 6th to June 8th, 1944, German use of wire communications was particularly difficult, according to official reports. More critically, Germans were forced to resort to open radio transmissions without encryption, which British cryptographers partially decoded. This led to severe delays in transmitting orders and coordinating defensive operations. One German officer wrote in his diary that it feels like the enemy is everywhere and nowhere at once, because we cannot coordinate our response. Wehrmacht communications teams worked without protection, expecting resistance too weak to interfere, a fatal underestimation that led to additional casualties. The psychological impact was immense. German officers described a sensation of complete loss of control, unable to contact neighboring units, uncertain about frontline developments, receiving contradictory orders. On June 15th, radio transmissions from French forces showed signs of complete disorganization, with headquarters unsuccessfully calling one another and the percentage of open transmissions sharply increasing. Plan Vert and Plan Violet formed the core of the resistance offensive, but they were part of a larger coordinated strategy involving 7 separate operational plans. Plan Tortue targeted the road network. Resistance fighters damaged 30 major roads, particularly the Paris-Cherbourg route. The name was grimly appropriate. German columns that should have raced to Normandy now crawled like tortoises through blocked routes and destroyed bridges. Plan Rouge focused on ammunition depots and power supplies. Explosions ripped through German storage facilities, destroying stockpiled ordnance that would never reach the front lines. Plan Noir attacked fuel depots and petroleum storage. In an era when armored divisions ran on gasoline, denying the Germans fuel was as effective as destroying their tanks. Plan Yawn targeted Wehrmacht command posts. By attacking headquarters facilities, resistance fighters disrupted the German command structure at its nerve centers. Plan Bleu sabotaged electrical networks and power infrastructure, plunging military installations into darkness and shutting down critical equipment. Each plan had specific target coordinates developed in London through cooperation between the Special Operations Executive and France's Intelligence Bureau. Germans did not expect partisans capable of coordinating operations on such a scale, as they were accustomed to seeing only sporadic, isolated attacks. When the sabotage began on the night of June 6th, German officers initially assumed these were random attacks by local groups, not a coordinated national operation. The cumulative effect of all plans slowed German transportation by an estimated 40 to 60%. Some train routes were completely blocked. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, which should have reached Normandy in 2 days, took over 2 weeks, arriving piecemeal between June 15th and June 30th. the division never fully assembled until July 10th, forced to plug holes in German defenses rather than conducting a coordinated counteroffensive. Among the remarkable individuals who made this sabotage possible, few stories rival that of Virginia Hall. Born in 1906, Hall lost her left leg below the knee in a hunting accident during her youth. She named her prosthetic leg Cuthbert and learned to walk with such skill that only careful observers noticed her disability. Hall became the first American woman recruited by the Office of Strategic Services for operations in France, and the second woman parachuted into occupied France by the Special Operations Executive. Her code name was Diane, and she operated under the French identity Marcel Montagne. Between March and July 1944, Hall organized and armed 1,500 French partisans in the Cher and Nièvre regions. Her methods combined audacity with meticulous attention to detail. She disguised herself as an elderly milkmaid, applying makeup to create wrinkles and visiting a dentist who deliberately ground down her teeth to give her the appearance of an aging French peasant. In this guise, she actually sold cheese, which she made herself, directly to German soldiers. She complained to headquarters about male officers who refused to take orders from a woman, saying, "You send men supposedly to work with me and for me, but you do not give me the necessary authority." The cheese-selling operation was brilliantly conceived. It allowed Hall to gather intelligence about troop positions, supply conditions, and morale while appearing completely harmless. Germans never suspected that the simple old woman was one of the most dangerous American spies in occupied Europe. Hall organized drop zones for air-delivered weapons and ammunition, established safe houses for sheltering agents and pilots, and coordinated dozens of successful airdrops. She personally directed several resistance groups of approximately 100 fighters each, organizing operations to sabotage bridges and rail lines, and supervised missions disrupting German supply lines. The Gestapo desperately wanted to capture the Limping Lady, as they called her. She was arrested and escaped Nazi captivity twice. In one close call, Gestapo agents burst into her Paris apartment shouting, "Where is the man?" They stood directly in front of the head of a network they had hunted for months. But Hall's disguise and quick thinking saved her. She carried a cyanide capsule in her purse and seriously considered using it to avoid torture and prevent betraying her network. After the war, attempts were made to dismiss Hall from the intelligence service due to her gender and disability. Eventually, she was recognized as one of the finest agents ever deployed, and her story inspired a new generation of intelligence operatives. In 2015, the United States officially declassified her files, confirming nearly all details of her legendary activities. If Virginia Hall was remarkable, Marie-Madeleine Fourcade was extraordinary on a different scale. Born in 1912, Fourcade became the only woman to lead a major French resistance network. By 1944, her organization alliance included 3,000 agents, the largest French intelligence network, with agents infiltrating every major port and city in France. Alliance had the codename Hedgehog, and Fourcade's personal codename was Matriarch. Before the war, she had earned a pilot's license, competed in automobile racing, and worked in the radio industry. In 1936, she met future resistance leader Georges Lustinot-Lacow at a social event, and he recruited her into a private intelligence operation against Germany's growing military power. Fourcade's greatest contribution to D-Day was a 55-foot detailed map of the Normandy beaches showing every German fortification, gun emplacement, anti-tank obstacle, machine gun nest, mine, and beach obstacle. This map became one of the most valuable pieces of intelligence in World War II. According to historians, without it, D-Day would have been far bloodier. Fourcade and her agents collected this information literally under German noses, sending agents to beaches disguised as tourists, vacationers, and locals. Forcade personally coordinated intelligence work from 3,000 agents, organized information delivery to London through various channels, and even used living plants as invisible letters. In 1944, Gestapo agents burst into her Paris apartment with machine guns, shouting, "Where is the man?" She stood before them, heart pounding, claiming she was just a refugee from Marseille who had come to Aix to avoid bombings. She said she just needed peace and quiet, terror gripping her heart. She had a cyanide capsule in her purse and considered taking it to avoid torture and betraying her network. Remarkably, Forcade escaped. After her escape, she traveled through Switzerland to Spain, then returned to England. Her escape story became legendary in the French resistance. The fact that 20% of Alliance agents were women, the highest percentage in any French resistance organization, testified to her leadership and vision. Historian Lynn Olson wrote that when she first came across Marie-Madeleine Forcade, she was stunned that she had never heard of her. This was a young woman who ran the largest and most influential Allied network in occupied France. The coordination of sabotage on the ground was impossible without trained operators. More than 90 Operation Jedburgh teams, 3-member groups of American, British, and French officers parachuted into occupied France in 1944. The first team, codenamed Hugh, was dropped the night before D-Day. The Special Operations Executive delivered 10,000 tons of combat equipment to France, 4,000 tons before D-Day and 6,000 tons after. By June 6th, they maintained approximately 50 radio contacts with French resistance groups. However, life as a radio operator was extremely dangerous. Germans could detect a transmission within 30 minutes. The average life expectancy of a radio operator in France was just 3 months, with a survival rate of 50-50. Yvonne Cormeau, a British female radio operator sent to France in August 1943, set a record. 400 radio transmissions in 13 months, the highest number among all operators. Her husband had been killed in a London bombing in 1940. Despite the deadly risk, she transmitted almost daily. Ben Cowburn was one of the most successful agents in France, completing 4 separate missions between 1941 and 1944. He served the longest period in France of any active agent. One of his successful operations involved destroying 6 locomotives in Troyes in a single night. Perhaps the most unusual weapon Cowburn deployed was a delivery of extremely powerful itching powder to partisans. The powder, made from silky hairs covering bean pods, was incredibly irritating when touched. It was applied to laundry sent to a local French laundry that washed German uniforms and private clothing. German soldiers began reporting mysterious skin conditions, scratching themselves bloody. One German U-boat was forced to return to port because its crew reported a strange skin disease. Germans conducted investigations, suspecting a new Allied biological operation. Noor Inayat Khan was among the most famous stories in France. She was the last surviving radio operator in Paris, where even owning a radio receiver meant a death sentence. She conducted operations for almost 4 months in Paris. Eventually betrayed, arrested, tortured, and executed at Dachau camp, her story became one of the most tragic and inspiring tales. Violette Sabo was sent to France on April 5th to 6th, 1944, by aircraft and parachuted on June 8th, 1944, near Limoges. Her group encountered a German roadblock in Salon-la-Tour. Her companion was wounded, and she engaged in a firefight with Germans, allowing him to escape. Her last known act was shouting, "Run, I will hold them," and staying behind. She was captured and later executed in a concentration camp. Coordination of this massive sabotage network depended on secure communication between London and resistance cells. Radio Londres, BBC broadcasts from 1940 to 1944 to occupied France, entirely in French, became the voice of hope and the instrument of command. The broadcast opened with the phrase, "Here is London. Frenchmen speak to Frenchmen." Germans banned listening to Radio Londres under threat of execution, but millions of French citizens secretly tuned in each night. The most famous coded messages came from poetry. On June 1, 1944, BBC broadcast the first line of Paul Verlaine's poem, Chanson d'automne, meaning the long sobs of autumn violins. This meant that the invasion would begin within 2 weeks. On June 5th, the second line was broadcast, meaning wound my heart with a monotonous languor. This was the signal that the invasion would begin within 48 hours, and sabotage operations should commence immediately. Each resistance group had its own set of 3 or 4 code words, often taken from French and British poetry. For example, the phrase, "This is how the moon shines through broken clouds," was used for one group in Bordeaux. Germans intercepted the BBC transmission on June 5, 1944. They correctly deciphered that it meant invasion within 48 hours, but they misinterpreted the message, thinking it meant something else. By the time they understood the truth, it was too late. Radio Londres transmitted hundreds of personal messages daily. Many seemed meaningless, like Jean's telephone is broken, or the Russian flies south. But for participants, these were critical instructions. The psychological impact was profound. Radio Londres became the voice of hope for the French people. There was a rumor that even Vichy French police often listened to Radio Londres despite the ban, because sooner or later they would need information about what was really happening. The strategic impact of resistance sabotage is perhaps best illustrated by the fate of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich. Transferred from the USSR to the Western Front, this elite armored division received orders to urgently reinforce Normandy's defense after the invasion began. Das Reich was one of the most combat-capable and ideologically committed SS divisions. In early 1944, it was reformed after heavy losses on the Eastern Front. After D-Day, it received orders to urgently move to Normandy for a counteroffensive. The theoretical arrival time was 2 to 3 days. The actual arrival was June 15th to 30th, more than 2 weeks later. The reasons for delay were manifold. Continuous attacks by French resistance on its convoys, destroyed railways forcing use of road routes, destroyed bridges and road blockades. Partisans used hit-and-run tactics, attacking, retreating, and attacking again. Das Reich lost more than 1,000 men simply in transit before engaging Allied forces. But the division's march to Normandy was also marked by horrific reprisals against civilian populations on June 9th, after successful attacks by French partisans on German soldiers on June 7th and 8th. Das Reich entered the town of Toul. They arrested all men aged 16 to 60. 99 men were publicly hanged on the streets. Another 149 were sent to Dachau concentration camp, where 101 died. In total, 213 civilians were killed in Toul. One 98-year-old veteran of the French resistance revealed in 2023 that in June 1944, his group executed 47 German prisoners in retaliation for the killings at Toul and Oradour. He said at the time he was young and thought it was just, but now, at 98, he knows it was wrong. French resistance played a critical role in the most successful disinformation operation in the history of warfare, Operation Fortitude. The goal was to convince Hitler that the real invasion would occur at Pas-de-Calais, with Normandy merely a diversionary attack. The result was extraordinary. German reserves remained in Pas-de-Calais for 7 weeks after D-Day. partisans actively spread false information about troop concentrations in Pas-de-Calais, transmitted controlled leaks through German double agents, and created the appearance of activity in Pas-de-Calais through fake radio transmissions and simulated troop movements. The legendary spy Juan Pujol, codenamed Garbo, a Spanish spy working for the Germans but actually working for the Allies, created a fictitious network of 27 imaginary informants. He sent Germans detailed but false reports about Allied preparations. After D-Day, he convinced Germans that Normandy was a diversionary maneuver. For 7 weeks after D-Day, the 15th German Army, more than 100,000 men, remained in Pas-de-Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. These troops could have been used in Normandy for a counteroffensive. Germans spent more resources on Pas-de-Calais defense than on Normandy defense. By June 1944, the French forces of the interior numbered approximately 100,000, which doubled by July 1944 and reached 400,000 by October 1944. This meant Germans not only fought regular Allied troops, but also faced a growing partisan army. The risks for partisans were extreme. In the evening of June 6, 1944, French resistance losses were estimated at 124 killed, wounded, missing, or captured. Between June 1943 and July 1944, one group of partisans derailed 79 enemy trains with personnel and equipment, destroyed 4 armored trains, and destroyed or damaged 96 locomotives and 577 cars and platforms. The moral impact on German soldiers was enormous. Troops seeing destroyed cars and feeling the effects of partisan sabotage lost faith in the possibility of organized defense. One German officer wrote that they were blind and deaf. They did not know what was happening at neighboring positions and could not coordinate a response. The long-term legacy of D-Day sabotage operations extended far beyond June 1944. The experience proved that organized resistance could play a crucial role in military campaigns. It inspired partisan movements throughout Europe and beyond. Many resistance veterans became political figures after the war. It increased respect for women in intelligence and military service. After the war, systematic training was created for sabotage specialists. The CIA and British intelligence developed based on special operations executive experience. Partisan warfare education and methods became standard in modern conflicts. More than 1,000 acts of sabotage, coordinated through 7 different plans, alongside intelligence from 3,000 alliance agents and operations by more than 90 Jedburgh teams, created a multi-layered threat to the German occupation system. The price was high. 124 partisans died in one day. Female spies like Virginia Hall risked their lives daily, and the average radio operator's lifespan was just 3 months. But the result justified the sacrifices. Das Reich was delayed for a critical 2 weeks. German communications were paralyzed, and disinformation about the invasion location drew German forces away from the Normandy coast. While Allied aviation, naval artillery, and infantry forces won D-Day on the beaches, it was the invisible army of partisans, spies, and saboteurs who won it behind the lines, in telephone cables, on railway tracks, and in the heart of German headquarters. The shadow war waged by French resistance in support of D-Day demonstrates that modern warfare is not won solely by conventional forces. Intelligence, sabotage, deception, and civilian resistance, when properly coordinated, can be as decisive as armored divisions and bomber squadrons. The 1,000 acts of sabotage on June 6, 1944, were not footnotes to history. They were essential chapters in the story of how Nazi Germany was defeated and Europe was